Jack had been a trucker for over 20 years. He had seen just about everything the road had to offer. Blazing sunsets, midnight storms, and the occasional oddball hitchhiker. But nothing could have prepared him for the night he took a load down Route 86. Route 86 was a desolate stretch of highway, a remote area with no gas stations, diners, or motels. It was just miles of empty road surrounded by dense, dark woods. Jack had been running late and needed to take this route to get to his drop-off point on time. As he merged onto the highway, the glow of his truck's headlights illuminated the road ahead, casting long shadows on the asphalt. The trees on either side loomed like black walls, their branches swaying in the cold night breeze. The radio crackled, the signal weakening as he got farther from civilization. Jack didn't mind the silence, found it peaceful. He turned the dial, searching for any station that might still come through. All he got was static. After about an hour of driving, Jack's eyelids grew heavy. He rubbed his eyes, keeping one hand on the wheel. The dark road seemed endless, and the rhythmic hum of the engine made it harder to stay awake. That's when he saw her. At first, Jack thought his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. In the distance, illuminated by his headlights, figures stood by the side of the road. He squinted, slowing his truck to get a better look. It was a woman, standing motionless, her back to him, wearing a white dress that seemed to shimmer in the light. Jack's grip tightened on the wheel. What was she doing out here in the middle of nowhere? He considered pulling over to offer her a ride. Something about the way she stood, perfectly still, not even a glance in his direction, sent a chill down his spine. As he passed her, Jack turned his head to get a better look. The woman didn't move. Her face was hidden by her long dark hair, and her arms hung limply by her sides. For a moment, it felt like time had slowed down, the air in the cab growing cold as if a window had been opened. Jack pressed on the gas, deciding it was best to keep moving. Hitchhikers weren't his concern, especially not in a place like this. But the uneasy feeling stayed with him long after she had disappeared from his rearview mirror. 15 minutes later, Jack saw something that made his blood run cold. Up ahead, standing by the road once again, was the same woman in the white dress. Couldn't be. He hadn't passed any side roads, and there was no way she could have gotten ahead of him. Jack's heart began to race. Was it his mind playing tricks on him? He drove by her again, this time keeping his eyes forward, refusing to look at her. But he could feel it. The cold in the air, the weight of her presence, as if she were watching him through the glass. Jack swallowed hard and kept driving. The darkness seemed to press in closer now, the trees on either side of the road towering over him like silent sentinels. His fingers trembled slightly on the steering wheel. Just get through the night, he muttered to himself. It's just the dark messing with you. But deep down, Jack knew better. There was something wrong with this road, and it wasn't done with him yet. Another half hour passed in tense silence. Just as Jack started to relax, the radio crackled to life. Static filled the cab, but beneath the interference, Jack could hear something. A voice. It was faint at first, but as he turned the volume up, it became clearer. "Help me." The voice was female, barely above a whisper, but it sent a jolt of fear through Jack's veins. He glanced at the radio, confused. There was no station signal out here. No reason for the radio to suddenly come alive. His hand hovered over the dial, but he couldn't bring himself to turn it off. The voice crackled again, more desperate this time. "Please, help me." Jack swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. He had heard plenty of stories from other truckers. Strange things that happened on the road, ghostly sightings, and haunted highways. He had always brushed them off as campfire tales, just something to pass the time between stops. But now, out here on Route 86, he wasn't so sure. He reached for the radio knob to turn it off. But before he could, the voice came through again. This time, it was right behind him. "Jack?" His blood froze. The voice knew his name. He slammed on the brakes, his truck screeching to a halt in the middle of the deserted highway. The cab fell silent, the radio now nothing but static. Jack sat there, his heart thudding in his ears, trying to make sense of what just happened. He was miles from anywhere, alone in the middle of the night, and somehow someone or something knew his name. A low hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. Jack's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and what he saw made his heart stop. The woman in the white dress was standing directly behind his truck, her face still hidden by her hair. But this time, she was moving. Slowly she began walking toward the driver's side door. Jack's mind screamed at him to drive, but his body felt frozen in place. He could hear the soft crunch of her footsteps on the gravel as she got closer and closer. His breathing grew shallow, panic rising in his chest. Suddenly, there was a loud thud. The woman was gone. Jack's door shook violently as if something had hit it. His pulse spiked and he jammed his foot on the gas, sending the truck speeding down the road. For the next few miles, Jack didn't dare look back. He kept his eyes glued to the road, heart racing, and tried to convince himself that he was just tired, that his mind was playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew the truth. Something had followed him. The road ahead curved, and as Jack rounded the bend, he saw it again. His blood went cold. In the distance, a single truck sat abandoned by the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking in the darkness. It was the truck from the stories, the one that had disappeared years ago on this very route. Jack's truck skidded to a halt. He could feel his heart hammering in his chest as he stared at the abandoned vehicle. His mind raced with fear. The stories about this road, the ghostly hitchhiker. It was all real. He had stumbled into a nightmare. He knew he had to get out of there, but something compelled him to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight from the cab and stepped out of the truck. The cold night air hit him like a wave, and the darkness seemed to press in on him from all sides. Jack approached the abandoned truck cautiously. The hazard lights flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the ground. As he drew closer, he noticed something chilling. The truck was eerily clean, as if it had been untouched for years. There were no personal belongings, no signs of struggle. It was as if the driver had simply vanished. He shone his flashlight inside the cab. The seat was empty, and the steering wheel was frozen in place, as if the driver had just stepped out and never returned. Jack's stomach churned with dread. He knew he should leave, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he needed to find. He walked around the truck, shining his light on the ground. That's when he saw it, a small, faded photograph lying in the dirt. Picked it up and examined it. The photo showed a young couple standing by a truck. They were smiling, happy. The woman in the picture had the same haunting, empty eyes as the figure Jack had seen on the road. Jack's blood ran cold. He realized that the woman in white was the ghost of the driver's wife, forever searching for her lost husband. And now she had found him. The temperature dropped suddenly, and Jack's breath became visible. He could hear the faint sound of weeping in the distance. He spun around, but there was no one there. The radio crackled again, and this time the voice was clearer than ever. "Help me." Jack's resolve hardened. He had to get out of there. He sprinted back to his truck, his flashlight swinging wildly. As he climbed into the cab and started the engine, he could feel the presence pressing in on him. He glanced in the rearview mirror one last time and saw the woman in white standing in the road, her face now visible, pale and sorrowful, her eyes filled with an eternal sadness. Jack floored the accelerator, beating away from the haunted stretch of Route 86. He didn't stop until he reached the nearest town. As he pulled into a truck stop, his hands were still shaking. He knew he had escaped, but the memory of that night would haunt him forever. Tom had always been a night owl, but tonight, the loneliness of the road was getting to him. As a long-haul trucker, he was used to the solitude, but this stretch of Highway 13 felt different. It was as if the darkness had a weight to it, pressing down on him and making the miles stretch on forever. The road was empty, save for the occasional flicker of a distant street lamp. Tom had been driving for hours, and his eyes were growing heavy. He needed a break, a chance to stretch his legs and grab a cup of coffee. He had heard about a rest stop ahead, a small one but sufficient for a quick stop. As he approached, the dim lights of the rest stop flickered into view. It was a welcome sight in the otherwise desolate landscape. Tom pulled in, his truck's engine rumbling as he came to a stop beside the lonely building. The rest stop was barely more than a small lot, rundown convenience store with a few picnic tables outside. The sign above the door was faded, its letters barely visible. Tom climbed out of his truck, cool night air hitting him like a splash of cold water. He stretched his legs and walked toward the building. The creak of the door as he pushed it open was the only sound in the eerie silence. Inside, the rest stop was dimly lit and empty. Fluorescent lights flickered sporadically, casting strange shadows on the walls. A bell above the door jingled, and Tom glanced around, expecting to see someone behind the counter. But there was no one. The shelves were stocked with snacks and drinks, but everything looked untouched, as if it had been that way for years. A thick layer of dust coated the products. "Hello?" Tom called out, his voice echoing off the empty walls. There was no response. He walked to the counter where a bell sat on a small stand. He gave it a gentle ring, hoping to attract the attention of whoever was supposed to be working. The sound of the bell seemed to hang in the air longer than usual, creating an uncomfortable stillness. Tom's unease grew as he waited, but no one appeared. He shrugged it off and grabbed a cup of coffee from the self-serve machine. The coffee was lukewarm and stale, but it was better than nothing. As he sipped the coffee, Tom's eyes wandered around the rest stop. He noticed a door in the back that led to what looked like a small storage room. The door was slightly ajar, and he could see a faint light flickering from inside. Curiosity got the better of him. He walked over to the door and pushed it open. The light flickering from inside revealed a cluttered room filled with old furniture, boxes, and broken equipment. It seemed like a typical storage room, but there was something unsettling about it, a sense of being watched. Tom's eyes fell on a small, dusty mirror propped up against the wall. It was cracked and dirty, but as he looked into it, he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the reflection, standing behind him, was a shadowy figure. Tom spun around, but the room was empty. He turned back to the mirror. The figure was gone. His heart raced. He backed out of the room, feeling a cold sweat break out on his forehead. As he made his way back to the front of the rest stop, he noticed that the lights had gone out. The entire place was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the exit sign. Panic surged through Tom. He fumbled for his phone to use as a flashlight, but it was dead. The darkness seemed to close in around him, and the silence was broken only by the sound of his own breathing. He heard a noise behind him, a soft whispering sound like someone calling his name. Tom spun around, his flashlight revealing nothing but empty shelves and shadows. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and Tom could feel a cold breath on the back of his neck. Bum. The voice was barely audible, but it was unmistakable. He could feel the presence of someone, or something, close by. He turned and ran back to his truck, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he tried to unlock the door. Finally, he managed to get inside and start the engine. As he pulled out of the rest stop, he glanced in his rearview mirror. The rest stop was now completely dark, the building appearing as a dark silhouette against the night sky. Tom didn't stop until he reached the next town. He parked at a well-lit truck stop, his hands still trembling. Couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him. The memory of that shadowy figure and the whispering voice haunted him, and he couldn't explain what he had experienced. The next day, Tom learned from locals that the rest stop he had visited had been closed for years. It was abandoned, and there were rumors of it being haunted. No one knew for sure. The stories of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences had become local legends. Tom never drove that stretch of Highway 13 again. The memory of the phantom rest stop lingered in his mind, a chilling reminder of the unknown that lay hidden in the darkness. He had survived, but the ghostly whisper of that night would forever haunt his dreams. It was just another late-night haul for Mike, a seasoned trucker who had been on the road for over a decade. He was hauling a load of electronics across a remote stretch of Highway 27, a road that was known for its desolate scenery and lack of rest stops. As usual, he was listening to his favorite old rock tune, comforting sound of music keeping him company in the quiet hours of the night. Mike had driven this route many times before. It was routine. Get on the road, drive through the night, and deliver the load by morning. But tonight felt different. There was a strange tension in the air, a heaviness that made him uneasy. Around midnight, Mike decided he needed a break. He'd been driving for hours and wanted to stretch his legs. He spotted a small, dimly lit rest area off the highway, barely visible through the thick fog that had rolled in. The rest area was a welcome sight, and Mike pulled in, hoping to get some fresh air and a quick snack. The rest area was deserted. Flickering lights cast long shadows on the pavement, and the only sound was the distant hum of passing cars. Mike stepped out of his truck, his boots crunching on the gravel as he walked toward the vending machines. He noticed a single figure standing near the far end of the lot, a man in a faded trucker cap and worn-out jeans. He looked out of place, a lone figure in the eerie fog. "Evening?" Mike called out, trying to make polite conversation. The man didn't respond, just stood there, staring into the fog. Mike shrugged it off and went to the vending machine, buying a bag of chips and a soda. When he turned back, the figure was gone. Mike thought nothing of it. He was tired, and his mind was playing tricks on him. He finished his snack, stretched his legs, climbed back into his truck. As he prepared to leave, he noticed something strange, a message written in the condensation on his windshield. It read, "Help me." Mike's heart skipped a beat. He rubbed the message away, convinced it was just a prank. He started the truck and pulled out of the rest area, the fog swirling around him as he drove. Fog grew thicker as he continued down the highway, and the darkness seemed to press in on all sides. The headlights cut through the fog. The road ahead was barely visible. Mike's unease grew as he drove, the eerie silence broken only by the occasional sound of his tires hitting the pavement. Suddenly, his radio crackled to life. It was a distress signal, barely audible through the static. Mike strained to listen, trying to make out the words. "Help, trucker, disappeared." The signal cut out and the radio went silent. Mike's pulse quickened. He had heard stories about truckers vanishing without a trace, but he had always dismissed them as urban legends. Now, with the message on his windshield and the distress signal on his radio, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The fog thickened, and Mike's visibility was reduced to just a few feet in front of him. The road seemed to stretch on endlessly, with no signs of other vehicles or landmark. It was as if he was driving through an endless void. Then he saw it. Up ahead, barely visible through the fog, was a large, rusty truck parked on the side of the road. Its hazard lights were flashing intermittently. Mike slowed down, curiosity getting the better of him. As he approached, he noticed that the truck was eerily similar to his own, with the same make and model. Pulled over behind the truck, heart racing. He stepped out of his cab, fog wrapping around him like a shroud. He approached the parked truck, flashlight illuminating the area. Truck's cab was empty. The engine was still warm. There was no sign of the driver. Mike's unease grew into full-blown panic. He turned to leave when he heard a sound, footsteps approaching from behind. He spun around, flashlight casting wild beams of light through the fog. There was no one there, only the oppressive darkness and the ever-present fog. Suddenly, the radio in his truck crackled to life again, this time with a clear, unmistakable voice. "Mike?" The voice was faint, but it was definitely his name. Mike's blood ran cold. He ran back to his truck, his heart pounding in his chest. He climbed into the cab, slamming the door behind him. He started the engine and pulled away, desperate to escape the nightmarish fog and the ghostly voice. As he drove, the fog began to clear, and the road stretched out in front of him once more. Mike's hands trembled on the steering wheel as he glanced in his rearview mirror. The truck he had seen was now gone, vanished into the mist. He drove through the night, not stopping until he reached a well-lit truck stop. Exhausted and shaken, parked his truck and sat in the dim light of the station, trying to make sense of what had happened. The memory of the distress signal, the message on his windshield, and the ghostly voice haunted him. Later, Mike learned from other truckers that the area he had driven through was known for strange occurrences. There were tales of truckers disappearing and reappearing, their trucks found abandoned in the fog. It seemed he had become part of the legend. Mike never drove that stretch of Highway 27 again. The foggy night and the vanishing trucker remained a haunting reminder of the eerie and unexplained forces that lurked in the darkness. Rick had been driving the same route for years, hauling loads between small towns across the Midwest. The job was monotonous, but it paid the bills. It was a late Friday night, and Rick was on his way home, eager to get back to his family after a long week on the road. The highway was deserted, the only sound being the hum of the engine and the occasional gust of wind rattling the truck. Rick had just crossed into the state line when he noticed a lone figure standing by the roadside. It was odd to see anyone out here at this hour, especially in such an isolated stretch of road. As he approached, the figure became clearer. A young woman in a tattered dress, her face pale and drawn. She was waving frantically, her eyes filled with desperation. Against his better judgment, Rick pulled over. He knew the risks of picking up hitchhikers, but something about the woman's pleading look made him hesitate. He rolled down the window, trying to see if she needed help. "Need a ride?" called out. The woman nodded, her eyes wide with relief. She climbed into the truck, and Rick noticed how cold she felt, despite the warm night. He offered her a blanket he kept in the cab, but she declined, saying she was fine. As they drove, Rick tried to make conversation to break the uncomfortable silence. "So where are you headed?" The woman's response was barely audible. "Just a few miles down the road. I need to get to the old bridge." Rick frowned. The old bridge was a notorious spot known for its eerie reputation. It had been closed for years, a crumbling relic of the past. It seemed strange that she would want to go there, especially at this hour. "Why the bridge?" Rick asked, trying to sound casual. The woman's eyes met his in the dim light of the cab. Her expression was somber. "It's important. I have to go there." Rick didn't press further. He was more interested in getting her to her destination quickly, so he could continue on his way. The night had taken on a strange quality, and the atmosphere in the truck felt charged with an unspoken tension. As they approached the turnoff for the old bridge, Rick noticed the temperature in the cab dropping. The woman was shivering, her breath coming out in visible puffs. Fog that had rolled in seemed to thicken, wrapping around the truck like a ghostly veil. Rick slowed down as they reached the entrance to the bridge. The old structure loomed ahead, its silhouette barely visible through the dense fog. The bridge was a skeletal frame of rusted metal and rotting wood, ghostly remnant of a bygone era. The woman directed him to a spot near the bridge. "This is good. You can let me out here." Rick pulled over, but as he glanced at the woman, he noticed a disturbing change. Her eyes, once filled with desperation, were now hollow and vacant. Her skin had taken on a ghostly pallor, and her form seemed to flicker in and out of focus. "Are you okay?" Rick asked, a note of concern in his voice. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she opened the door and stepped out of the truck. As she walked toward the bridge, her figure seemed to dissolve into the fog. Rick watched, unable to tear his eyes away, until she disappeared completely into the mist. Rick sat there for a moment, his heart pounding. The temperature in the cab had plummeted, and an uneasy feeling settled over him. He shook himself out of his stupor and decided it was time to leave. He started the truck and made his way back to the main road. The rest of the drive home was uneventful. But Rick couldn't shake the image of the woman from his mind. The way she had vanished into the fog, coldness in the cab, it all felt surreal. He tried to convince himself it was just a figment of his imagination, a trick of the night. The next morning, Rick heard on the local news about a tragic accident that had occurred on the old bridge many years ago. A young woman had died in a crash, and her spirit was said to haunt the area, searching for someone to help her find peace. Rick realized with a shiver that he had encountered that very spirit. The ghostly hitchhiker had been searching for a ride to her final resting place, and he had unwittingly become part of her story. The encounter left him with an unsettling sense of dread and a new respect for the eerie legends that lingered along the roads he traveled. Rick never picked up another hitchhiker. The memory of the midnight hitchhiker and the old bridge haunted him, a chilling reminder of the ghostly encounters that could lurk in the shadows of the open road. It was nearing the end of Mike's shift. He had been driving for hours, transporting a load of industrial equipment across the remote stretch of Highway 39. The sun had set, and the darkness enveloped the road like a heavy blanket. Mike was exhausted, his eyes strained from the long hours behind the wheel. He spotted a small, run-down truck stop ahead. It was a welcome sight in the desolate landscape, and he decided to pull over. He needed to refuel both his truck and himself, grab a bite to eat, and stretch his legs before continuing on his journey. The truck stop was barely illuminated by a single flickering neon sign. The parking lot was empty except for a few scattered trucks, their drivers presumably inside resting or grabbing a late-night snack. Mike parked his truck and walked towards the building, gravel crunching under his boots. Inside, the truck stop was dimly lit and seemed to be stuck in a time warp from the 1970s. The walls were lined with outdated advertisements and old-fashioned memorabilia. The only sound was the hum of a neon clock above the counter and the faint buzzing of a refrigerator. The cashier, an older man with a grizzled beard and tired eyes, looked up from his newspaper as Mike approached. "Evening," Mike said, trying to sound cheerful despite his fatigue. "Evening," the cashier replied, his voice gravely. "What can I get you?" Mike ordered a coffee and a sandwich, then wandered over to a small table by the window. He sat down and sipped his coffee, enjoying the brief respite from the road. The warm light from the table lamp provided a comforting contrast to the cold darkness outside. As Mike ate, he noticed a peculiar sight. Outside the window, there was a figure standing near the edge of the parking lot. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, a dusty suit, and a hat that looked like it belonged to another era. The man stood still, staring at Mike's truck with an eerie intensity. Mike tried to ignore him, attributing the odd appearance to his tired mind playing tricks on him. The figure remained, unmoving and unblinking. Mike felt a chill run down his spine. He finished his meal and walked back to the counter to pay. The cashier looked up, seemingly unfazed by the odd sight. "Is everything all right?" Mike asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "Just another night," the cashier replied with a nonchalant shrug. "You get all sorts of characters around here." Mike nodded and left the truck stop. Curiosity piqued. He glanced back as he approached his truck and saw that the figure was still there, watching him. Feeling uneasy, quickly climbed into the cab and started the engine. As he pulled out of the truck stop, he glanced in his rearview mirror. The man was gone, but a sense of foreboding lingered in the air. Mike tried to shake off the unsettling feeling as he continued down the highway. The night was quiet, and Mike was lost in his thoughts when he noticed something strange. The road seemed to stretch on endlessly, with no signs of landmarks or other vehicles. Familiar scenery had vanished, replaced by an eerie emptiness. He turned on the radio, hoping to break the silence. The static crackled, and then a distorted voice came through. "You shouldn't have stayed." Mike's heart raced. He tried to tune the radio, but the voice persisted, repeating the same unsettling message. "You shouldn't have stayed." Truck's lights flickered, and the engines sputtered. Mike's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he fought to keep the truck moving. The road ahead was shrouded in an impenetrable darkness, and the familiar feeling of safety on the open road was replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. Suddenly, the truck's headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was the same man from the truck stop, his face pale and expressionless. Mike slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt. The figure slowly approached the truck, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Mike could see his face more clearly now, a gaunt, hollow expression that seemed to be staring right through him. The man raised a hand, pointing towards the horizon. "Where am I?" Mike shouted through the window, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, continued to point, his gaze unwavering. Mike's fear intensified. He backed up the truck, trying to escape the phantom figure. The road seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The headlights revealed no sign of the familiar highway, only darkness and fog. In a panic, Mike turned the truck around and sped back towards the truck's stop. The road twisted and turned, leading him in circles, the once familiar landscape become a nightmarish maze. When he finally saw the flickering neon sign of the truck stop again, he was almost relieved. He parked the truck and rushed inside, heart pounding. The cashier looked up from his newspaper, seemingly unchanged by the events. "You okay?" the cashier asked. Mike's voice was shaky. "What's going on?" "I saw a man." He was pointing. Cashier's eyes darkened, and he nodded slowly. "You saw him, didn't you? The phantom of the highway. He's a warning for those who get lost in the night." Mike's blood ran cold. The realization hit him hard. He had been caught in a trap, guided by the phantom's eerie presence. The cashier's words echoed in his mind, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked beyond the safety of the truck stop. Mike never returned to that stretch of Highway 39. The memory of the phantom figure and the endless darkness haunted him, a chilling reminder of the mysteries that lay hidden on the desolate roads.